Welcome back to the Sounds of the Baskerville. James Flaherty here with the Hound, Chris Baskerville. How are you, Chris?
James, good afternoon. Good.
This is part of a little series we've been doing since we celebrated our 100th episode, Chris. 100 episodes of the Sounds of the Baskerville.
And who would have thought we'd shoot this immediately after?
Yeah, wow. Well, we mightn't run it straight after, but anyway, the idea is what we thought we'd do is maybe do the top 10 topics that we'd talked about over 100 episodes. And it was quite an interesting exercise to sit there and go, well, what did we talk about? Because we talk a lot. And it was, and sort of in that 50s and 60s territory, and also sort of a little bit the beginning of this season, we were talking about things like the creditor, what the creditor does about risk and risk alerts. So that was interesting. We talked about that. And we also talked about director's penalty notice and, of course, our favourite, SBR. Which
Small Business Restructuring.
Small Business Restructuring, yeah. So I thought maybe we'd just start when well, over the seasons we've had the two Patricks in to talk about Patrick Coughlin of Creditor Watch, and we've also had Patrick Schweitzer of Alaris coming in and talking to us about risk. And I think that goes to that, well, I'm a creditor. How do I stop this happening to me? What do you think that was the takeaway for you if you put your hat on as a liquidator for the times when people could have used those tools and didn't?
Yeah, there's more and more information coming out that's available now, and we seem to be sharing a lot more information that was not available. We're still missing small business financial statements that are publicly available. I believe they do that in Switzerland. Small businesses have to report their finances publicly. So that would probably be the last thing, or at least one of the major things. If there was something going to be changing, it should be that every business discloses their financial position, because that at least allows a huge amount of transparency as to know who you're actually dealing with. Will that ever happen? We don't know.
That's an interesting question, because there's a conference that you and I both went to, colleagues had went to for sure, where the tax office was talking about the criteria that they use as red flags, like this business could be at risk. And someone said, well, why don't you actually give that to the company itself and say, hey, here's some of the red flags we look for, and you've got these three.
1, 2, 3, yeah.
If you keep going down this road, it's not going to be good. Should you be talking to us, or maybe reaching out to getting some professional advice?
Now, we can't talk to, and we obviously pressed both Patricks in this as to what the algorithm was behind their secret sauce for how they come up with their insolvency index or risk factor, right?
I think if anyone was going to do it, I thought you might have been able to crack it, but somehow that whole proprietary thing, I don't know, they wouldn't let it go.
And they've never experienced one of my interrogations before, and I was going to let them go.
Public examination.
Just this once.
Public examination, maybe you might get there. But I'll remind you, Patrick, you're under oath. But anyway,
so what does that mean? What does that mean? That means that these formulas have to be based on the information that is available that's out there, right? And it's normally creditors driving that process. So if a creditor takes an action, like if they take a step to chase money, usually called a money's owed type claim, and there's multiple ways you can do that. These resources that are available to creditors, the idea is that this data is being scooped up and aligned with the customer body. The other thing is when you change anything fundamentally with the structure of a company, a director, an address, a wind-up notice, or whatever, it gets flagged on ASIC. So again, that data gets scooped into these credit files. So at the moment, it's really a creditor-driven and based on publicly available information. Now, what is not on these credit files, unless it's reported, are outstanding tax debts. So unless the tax office actually proactively says this company owes the tax man a substantial amount of money, it doesn't go on the list. So, it's obviously buyer beware still plays a part. I think caveat emptor.
Caveat emptor.
Going back just a few years. But, it is still buyer beware. So the creditor really has to take proactive steps to do their own investigations, there's heaps of publicly available databases out there, do your own searches, make the inquiries, probably even ask for the financial data of the customer so you understand who you're in business with. to safeguard yourself.
And I think there's that whole idea, though, that you could, if you're going to sell something to somebody on credit, you might want to think about what you're making them sign in exchange for your trust that they'll pay you.
Yeah.
So if you just got something you downloaded from the interweb as your terms and conditions of trade, or had something that had been around that, some old thing that was run off that, the person who retired 20 years ago used to do, and you've just kept on photocopying it. Well, the laws have changed.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot. Yeah, so you're talking about the terms and conditions, like making sure your terms and conditions are updated and modified, because you're right, laws change all the time. Also, with the introduction of securities being registered now on the PPSR, I mean, we're going back more than a decade now, but creditors should be seriously looking at how they secure themselves over the products that they provide.
And in fairness to what you just said, the number of times that you and I have said to people, check the PPSR, and the people go, the what?
Yeah.
The what? So it's quite a significant change about how things were registered, which very few people really understand. So,
but also the ridiculous part of it, from our perspective, is it's relatively cheap. It's relatively cheap to put the security on. It's relatively cheap to search. Like, I think, we're talking $7.
$7 to register if you know what you're doing, which is, I think it's $2 to check.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that hard.
Very low costs to do this.
Yeah. And so there's, I think when you're representing creditors, it's probably nice to represent creditors in some senses who've helped themselves a bit, to at least done some of the due diligence up front, to either enhance their own position or try and get some security, or ideally not be there. So.
And look, don't get me wrong, creditors are one of our best sources of information. So, if a company has failed, they're usually the ones that tell us where the skeletons are sometimes buried. So we go, thank you, and because they've done a lot of due diligence, or they've intertwined their business with these directors, and they've known them for many years. So they're great sources. And also, we asked them, hey, could you just give us the documents that the company represented to you to get this credit facility up and running? And there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. And there's a lot of sometimes misrepresentations. And we go, thank you very much. You've basically sort of BS'd your way into credit,
And if you do that, that's not good.
No.
Okay, so then when we go back to how we started these series, we're talking about in the pandemic, people around in insolvency. Well, no one was allowed to go bust, so we didn't really have anything to do. So we started talking about this, and we talked about this thing called small business restructuring. And I can remember what a thought bubble. I think I was quoted as saying it was a thought bubble, in fact, it actually went, I think you did the second one in the country. The thing evolved, though. We thought, let's just it's a bit like just see what this thing does. And I think we've learned a lot. We've had some interesting experiences with them. There's now hundreds of them a month now, these small business restructures.
Yeah. Well, I think ASIC's last report they did in June 25 said that nearly 3,400 companies took it up with a near 80% success rate.
And the reason why I raise it now is because we're talking about the hidden. A lot of people might have a green tick on or something like that on one of these credit reports, or Alaris mightn't have found anything where there's no court actions, but then suddenly the tax man's down there to close them down and no one knew about it. The only debt they weren't paying was the biggest one of all. The tax man has started reporting for over $100,000 or roughly, I think.
That's absolutely happening now.
Yeah, and that's certainly moving the needle a little bit. That gives a bit more insight. But this small business restructuring, we've done this a few times, the tax man's often one of the only creditors. There's the last person who gets paid their money. And as a taxpayer, I think the tax man is getting sick of that and has said, okay, party's over. Let's get some of this money back in. So some of the, trying to phone up and sob stories, not so much anymore. But there is this small business restructuring that if you've got a good story, he'll listen to you. Is that, in summary?
There's a few things that you need. And one of them is, but for an extraordinary event, flood, fire, COVID, cyclone, magical unicorns rolling through your business and destroying everything, you've got a viable business, right? You've tried to be a really good taxpayer by lodging everything on time, and you've been upfront and transparent with the tax man, and you're offering a reasonable return on the money to pay those taxes over time. Not a very long time, but over time, they generally are looking for ways to say yes. But they've certainly been changing their tune over the last 18 months because they are realizing that they are one of the last creditors, the largest creditor, and usually everybody else gets preferred before the small business restructuring rolls in. So, yeah, I think they're starting to get a little bit annoyed by that. Plus, I think we, as an industry, as we're all trying to work out what this small business restructuring means, we're all talking to each other. Hey, what did you get that small business restructuring for? What did you get that plan for? It became known that about 20% seemed to be quite acceptable. We're now starting to see that the ATO wants more, sort of more pushing towards that 30% return now.
Yeah, and certainly if people have got what are called Division 7A loans, bought the gym membership out of the company funds and just never remembered to pay it back.
Yeah.
Those sorts
Bought
of
the Ferrari,
loans.
the Maserati,
yeah, that's right.
yeah,
You've probably
the
seen
deposit for the house.
You've seen a few more of those, and so they're definitely not excited about when the director owes more money than the tax bill.
No, particularly when, and we see this quite often, the tax bill magically equals the director's loan account. Isn't that amazing? Where the director pulls so much money out of the business that also equals the tax bill.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
And they're astute people in there. They can see that. They can read all these numbers. They've got access to probably more information than we mere mortals do in there. And they've got some pretty powerful tools. So I've just said to anyone, just assume they already know or can figure it out pretty quick. So, so I think you've got to go with an open story and a qualified insolvency practitioner, such as yourself, who's got experience in talking through these business. Yes, this is viable. It's got a good story. They've paid their super.
You've lodged everything on time. Like you're not bad with your compliance because your compliance history plays a part. Sure, you've got all your tax returns up to date today for the purposes of small business restructuring, but you've only done that because you want the advantage of small business restructuring. What it should be is you're lodging everything along the way and you just need that a little bit of assistance.
And coming out of the pandemic, it seems like that's the way it's going to go. It's not, there may not be quite so many. It's interesting, there was a lot of pressure about having the threshold because you can only have to owe less than $1 million worth of unsecured debt tax, that sort of stuff. And we sort of there's a few times where we went fairly close, but there doesn't seem to be quite that same pressure to increase. There was talk about increasing the threshold, but that seems to have quietened down a little bit.
I was hoping they'd follow sort of the American and the UK model where they're kind of pushing it to more towards $3 million because you would absolutely open up more businesses that could benefit from this style of restructuring, but also it makes our remuneration and the fees you pay for our services more palatable. Yeah. Because, generally we have to offer fixed fee and a fixed percentage of the monies that are returned to creditors. So the bigger the debt burden that's available, the more economical our services can be. Whereas if we're not lifting that $1 million limit, then it is what it is.
It is what it is. But I do think it does give an opportunity for you to think, and if I think back to some of the early videos that you did, and you were thinking back to your own experience and about being in a family, an entrepreneurial family, if you could go back and help your father at that stage through some tough times, if you had advice for someone you could go back to then, and that's been a theme, kind of how can you help an entrepreneur or a small business person? How can you help a family to learn how to do it better? And that's what SBR was, something that was enabled you to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, SBR was the first of its kind where we allowed the director to remain in control.
Right.
Because every other system that we have in Australia in the insolvency scheme, everybody loses control, and they lose control to us. So we take the keys, we kick out the director, right? You've had your time, you're out. It's now our time. So SBR was the first one that said, no, we need to keep the director in play, trading in the ordinary course. We become like a helicopter parent of the director, and we just make sure that they stay on track. We help guide the director in what the proposal should look like. And then we've got to make sure that they stick to the proposal and hold them accountable to that.
But by the same token, let them fight on.
Yeah, because you know your business better than us. I mean, we'll figure it out eventually, but you've got 3 years in the game. You know the business better than us. You know how to make money.
So here's it lasted. Sorry, I've interrupted you, but here's the last. With all of those skills and experience you've got of how businesses go wrong, here's an opportunity that SBR did present you to apply some of that skills in a live business without going into the big voluntary administration, which is often a more expensive process, and for slightly larger businesses where you have to be as a voluntary administrator, you're the man. Yeah, aren't you running it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to roll into a voluntary administrator, just like any other one of my learned colleagues in my profession. But we go in immediate personal liability immediately. So in other words, from minute one, bang, you're on the hook. So what SBR does for us, and I think this is one of the advantages I saw immediately, de-risks the program for us. So in other words, we don't have to take on those risks of trade anymore. That is squarely on the director's shoulders there. We just got to hold them accountable and ask a lot of questions, put together a report that makes sense to the creditor body. I think we need to give these guys a second chance. And remembering you can only do this once every 7 years.
Yeah, so make it count.
You got to make it count.
Now, we've said all this stuff. I mean, we've talked in a previous podcast about the psychology of your director of knowing when to stop. And we've talked about taking advantage of an SBR when you know that you've got behind. How many times does a director not do any of those things until they get a thing in the post called a director's penalty notice? So,
well, if you look at the pie chart of insolvency, let's just say 3/4 of it is liquidation, which is either by the court or it's by the voluntary hand of the shareholder group going, we're done and dusted. So if you look at it from that perspective, you could almost throw out Pareto's principle here and go 80% of the time they leave it way too late, and it's really the 20% that actually take a proactive step. So using your psychology here, those that are huge in worrying about their situation, that have huge empathy for other people, generally will be the ones that put their hand up going, I'm really worried about here. And they'll generally put their hand up earlier. Those are a little bit more cowboy-esque and not so much reckless, but this is my baby and I'm going to fight tooth and nail to the bitter end, and I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They will fight tooth and nail, and they will not realize there's a problem until the bitter end. And sometimes the bitter end comes involuntarily, which is, you did your best, you hung on to the bitter end, and the court has gone, it's now time for you to go.
That's right. And so the tax office might, for example, that might be a creditor's statutory demand, or you might get a thing in the post which may or may not go to the right address if you've got the correct registered business address for your company on ASIC. And it says director's penalty notice, 21 days. You can basically do one of three things, can't you? Sort of like
one of four. The first one should be pay the tax bill.
That's
always recommended.
Funny, which people do number four. Yeah.
Well, what do I do with this notice? Well, can you pay the tax bill? It's usually the first question I ask.
Like most other people do.
But you've got two styles of director penalty notice, and we refer to them non-lockdown, lockdown. The lockdown one are for everyone that lodged their tax returns late, in which case it's an automatic liability. You can't get out of it unless you pay the tax. Amazing. If you were a good taxpayer, you lodged everything on time, but the ATO now needs to want to move against the director, they have to send a notice first, and usually you've got four options. Pay the tax bill, go into voluntary administration, go into small business restructuring, or just liquidate the company, just bring it all to an end. And as long as you take one of those four steps, the penalty is remitted, so it's no longer a threat to the director personally. But you miss that 21 days, and you're gone.
You've got the whole lot.
Yeah, the whole lot becomes the director's personal liability.
And it sits on your unpack tax portal, and then say you get a new job or something like that, and you get a $500 tax return.
Gone. Yeah.
So
even bankruptcy.
Yeah.
What people say, oh, I've just gone bankrupt. What happens to my tax returns post bankruptcy or during the bankruptcy? I said, if you're owed a refund, the tax office takes it for those 3 years. So yeah.
Okay, so now, so I suppose if you circle back, if you can pay your tax, you should. If you can't, there are options. But getting a director's penalty notice is the wrong option. And if it gets one, you don't wait more than 21 days to do something about it.
Basically it's a ticking time bomb. That's the way to look at it, right? And this is the important thing for all directors is update your residential address on ASIC, because the notice is going to the last known residential address of the director. So if you've moved home 10 years ago, guess where the notice is going? And you can no longer can a director say, yeah, but I didn't receive the notice. It's now legislated that as long as we send it to your last known address on ASIC, it's served.
So they're coming. The ATO have told them that told everybody that they're sending more of them out, and people are getting them.
Tens of thousands are going out the door, and nearly 30,000 companies have been registered on creditor files lately, because the ATO is chasing somewhere in the order of about $105 billion, of which they think half of it is collectible.
Right.
So and magically, I think if I remember seeing the budget in May correctly, we have a surplus this financial year. Next financial year, we have a deficit of $50 billion, which magically is the unrecovered tax liability that currently is out there.
That's right.
So you can understand why the
pretty keen
ATO
to
is
get
going to
it.
go and get their $50 billion.
So I think of the lessons from that. So we talk back to the Sounds of the Baskerville over the last 100 and something episodes. I think it's there is a bit about there are things for creditors to use to watch out. There are tools like SBR for small businesses that get behind for good reasons, and there's a big stick that you don't want to get called a director's penalty notice. But they're the
amongst
ones,
others.
Amongst others. Yeah. But all too often, they're the ones you see. Hey, thanks, Chris.
No worries. Thanks, James.